Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. Okay, continuing on with more from the energy mix on that special report examining what the IPCC states. Breaking 3.3 billion people highly vulnerable. Now, there's 8 billion people now. So we're talking, 3/8 of the world's population. Right? A little more than that, but 3/8. That's a lot. That's yeah, that's like some 37, 38, 40% of the world's population. So 3.3 billion people are highly vulnerable. 1.5C still brings unavoidable hazard as brief window for climate action rapidly closes. Here's a photo. You can see probably some sort of storm event creating some destruction and certainly some damage. Limiting global warming to 1.5C would still cause unavoidable increases in multiple climate hazards for the 3.3 to now 3.6 billion people, that's now approaching 50% of the world's population, whose living conditions make them vulnerable to these impacts, the IPCC reports. Across the thousands of studies that went into this IPCC summary for policymakers, SPM, the cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. And any further delay in drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions will miss a brief and rapidly closing windows of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. It's nice to see some blunt language, but it's too late, in my view. I discussed with you in my updated ocean heat content video that, in my view, in my analysis, the tipping point was already passed in the mid-1990s, and that we have locked into place a warming trajectory that's going to bring disastrous results this century. All the thermal inertia, all the heat energy in the ocean, the permafrost continuing to thaw out, the oceanic permafrost thawing out, along with the ever-increasing CO2 and water vapor levels, we're trapping ourselves into a runaway system. Even 1.5 degree average global warming, often seen as a relatively safe target for rapid decarbonization efforts, would cause unavoidable increases in multiple climate hazards and present multiple risks to ecosystems and humans. Near-term actions that limit global warming to close to 1.5C would substantially reduce projected losses and damages related to climate change in human systems and ecosystems. And that would be compared to higher warming levels, but cannot eliminate them all. And what happens if should humanity temporarily overshoot the 1.5 target? I think once you go over it, I don't think it comes back down, but okay, let's see what they say about that. Many human and natural systems will face additional severe risks. Some of those impacts will cause a release of additional greenhouse gases. Some will be irreversible. Even global warming is reduced. Okay. That seems like a contradiction in that one sentence. Irreversible, which implies that the warming continues even if global warming is reduced. Okay, which is it? Not clear on that one there, guys. Since the IPCC produced its last assessment report in 2014-2015, there's increasing evidence that degradation and destruction of ecosystems by humans increases the vulnerability of people. Unsustainable land use, and land cover change, unsustainable use of natural resources, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, pollution, their interactions. You've heard me always talk about interactions. Adversely affect the capacities of ecosystems, societies, communities, and individuals to adapt to climate change. Ecosystem loss has cascading long term impacts on people globally, especially for indigenous peoples and local communities who are directly dependent on ecosystems to meet basic needs. That is, they live a subsistence lifestyle, literally live off the land. Multiple times higher risk as emissions rise. Okay, that's going to be featured in here. This week's IPCC report is the second of three from the working groups conducting the agency's sixth global assessment of the state of the global climate. The science assessment last August affirmed that human activity is unequivocally producing a world of heat waves, wildfires, floods, sea level rise, needless death and suffering, and warned of an unimaginable, unforgiving world without drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The last working group report in the series dealing with emission reduction strategies is due in April, and the final synthesis report this September. The policymakers' summary of this week's report includes sections on current and future climate impacts, adaptation measures, and their limits and strategies for climate resilience. It warns that the risk of the full range of serious climate impact over the next 2 decades becomes high to very high at lower levels of global warming than scientists realized when the last assessment was published. Ooh, this one is interesting. Climate impact are also becoming more complex as different types of local effects and disasters combine. How many times have you heard me say, the unknown parameters, the unknown interactions? That's what they're saying right there. I've been saying, warning about this for how many years now? Boom, there it is. Concurrent and repeated climate hazards occur in all regions, increasing impacts and risks to health, ecosystems, infrastructure, livelihoods, and food. Multiple risks interact, generating new sources of vulnerability to climate hazards and compounding. I don't want the whole damn paragraph. Compounding overall risk. Those overlaps and collisions will continue to make the climate emergency more difficult to manage. Multiple climate hazards will occur simultaneously. Multiple climatic and non-climatic risks will interact, resulting in compounding overall risk and risk cascading across sectors and regions. I did that recent video where I talked about the interactions of climate tipping elements. You may want to go check that out if you haven't done so. Between 2041 and 2100, 425 identified key risks assess mid and long-term impacts are up to multiple times higher than currently observed. Things are increasing more so and sooner. Translation. But the magnitude and rate of climate change and associated risks depends strongly on near-term mitigation and adaptation action, since every increment of additional warming will bring more serious climate impact with accompanying loss and damage. Scientists also conclude that some actions meant to address the climate emergency, particularly CO2 removal, will do more harm than good. Solar radiation modification approaches, if they were to be implemented, introduce a widespread range of new risks to people and ecosystems which are not well understood. And deployment of afforestation of naturally unforested land or poorly implemented bioenergy, with or without carbon capture and storage can compound climate-related risks to biodiversity, water, food security, livelihoods, especially if implemented at large scales, especially in regions with insecure land tenure. So they talk about uneven adaptation efforts fall short. While countries have produced multiple benefits with the efforts to adapt to climate change, that progress is unevenly distributed, with many initiatives that prioritize immediate and near-term climate risk reduction, which reduces the opportunity for transformational adaptation. Growing public and political awareness of climate impacts and risks have resulted in at least 170 countries and many cities including adaptation in their climate policies and planning processes. Those efforts are fragmented, small in scale, incremental, sector specific, designed to respond to current impact or near term risk, and focus more on planning rather than implementation. Basically, oh, we're doing something, but you're not doing something. Kicking a can down the road. Moreover, adaptation activity is unequally distributed across regions of the world, partly because of widening disparities between the cost of adaptation and the funding available to make it happen. The summary looks at the feasibility of climate adaptation options on land, oceans, ecosystems, urban, rural areas, energy systems, and the intersections with health and involuntary migration. Translation: an area becomes inhabitable, creates a whole bunch of climate refugees, and the people leave. It concludes that some ecosystems have already reached the limits of their ability to adapt to climate change, and increasing global warming losses and damages will increase, and additional human and natural systems will reach adaptation limits. So they're talking about, reducing by 45% the carbon emissions to even have a shot at what they call the keep it from going over 1.5. Well, in wake of the situation in Ukraine, you have a lot of countries now scrambling to go to renewables, trying to reduce. A lot of them are reducing their import of Russian oil and gas. It is a tragedy that it takes a war for countries to start getting their act together. They should have been getting their act together 40 years ago. It's just a tragedy that that's what it's taking. It's really inexcusable. So that's what this short report has to say. More to come. Hello, folks. This is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.